How Europe partitioned Africa. The partition of Africa, also called the conquest of Africa, the rape of Africa, or the scramble for Africa, was the invasion, annexation, division, and colonization of most of Africa by 7 Western European powers during an era known as New Imperialism between 1833 and 1940. The cause of the partition of Africa include 1. The Europeans saw the need to acquire territories outside Europe to serve as a market for their surplus goods, and Africa was their answer since it was a newly founded continent by the Europeans. 2. Unemployment rate in the European countries played important roles in motivating the partition of the Africa continent by the Western European powers. Overpopulation in certain parts of Europe contributed to the scramble and the partition of Africa. The Europeans therefore wanted a place to resettle surplus citizens. This is evident when the British occupied South Africa and some parts of Kenya where the climate and weather was favorable for European settlement. There was therefore mass European settlement in those areas as compared to Gold Coast, where the economy was less conducive for Europeans. 3. National pride and superiority over others by the Europeans served as a major reason. The Europeans scramble for the partition of Africa. In the Gold Coast, for instance, where the British had already established their control over the southern states, the British felt threatened when the French annexed the territory of Loam in 1883. The British therefore quickly moved to annex Asante and the northern territories of the Gold Coast as British colonies. 4. Europeans wanted to extend Western civilization, culture and education to Africa. The Europeans considered the Africans as backward and illiterate and saw it as their responsibility to educate and civilize these backward people. Upon the annexation of African territories, the Europeans established schools to enlighten these Africa people. 5. The partition among the various European powers of late 19th century was triggered off mainly by the activities of one individual, King Leopold II of Belgium in the Congo Basin. King Leopold hired explorers led by Henry Morton Stanley to explore and navigate the Congo and arrange trade with the local leaders of the area. Publicly, King Leopold of a civilizing mission to carry the light for millions of men still plunged in barbarism will be dawn of a better era. Privately, Leopold had the idea of exploitation and profit-making at the expense of the Africans. In 1908, it was revealed that under King Leopold's instructions, native people of the Congo were forced to farm wild rubber as a form of tax payment to the colonial government. Those who were unable to reach their rubber proportional share assigned to each participant often had a hand or foot chopped off, or were killed by Leopold's agents. Other European countries such as Britain, France and Portugal became alarmed, and as conflict over the Congo Basin seemed imminent, Otto von Bismarck, the then German Chancellor, who was a pacifist, called for a conference in Berlin to discuss issue regarding the annexation of territories in Africa and other issues such as the slave trade in December 1884 to 1885. This conference is famously known as the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference was a diplomatic meeting that divided Africa among European powers without consulting Africans. Effects of the partition of Africa. The effects of the partition on the continent are many. They range from social, political, and to some extent economic effects. The most important effects are felt strongly in the social and political sectors. 1. It crippled the indigenous political institutions of the people. After the partition, the European countries trading in Africa used subtle means and sometimes force to establish their political control over their newly acquired territories. In some cases, the Africans resisted. Even those states who were persuaded by the Europeans were deceived to accept European protection and support against their neighboring aggressive states. The Asantes, for instance, had to fight and resist the British for about 50 years, until their final defeat in the famous Yawa-Asantewawa War in 1900 and 1901. 2. It causes dispute between African states, which can sometimes degenerate into wars. The poor demarcation of the territories in Africa by the Europeans is a contributing factor to the various border disputes. The conflict between Mali and Burkina Faso over the Agache Strip, where the Bobo resides, illustrates the problems caused by the poor demarcation of borders. Another instance is the conflict between Nigeria and Cameroon over the Bakassi Peninsula. 3. It led to inter-ethnic wars in many African countries over the years. This has cases of inter-ethnic wars among Africans of the same nation, such as the war between the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda, where thousands of people died, and the conflict between the Konkombas and the Nanumbas of the northern part of Ghana serves as evidence. There is also another conflict in Ghana between the Alavanyo and the Ankonya of the Volta region of Ghana over lands. 4. It laid the foundation for the Europeans to colonize the continent. The Europeans at the time of colonization had no interest in developing the colonies, but continued to exploit the people's natural resources to serve as raw materials for European industries, whilst the people had little or no benefits from their own natural resources. In the Gold Coast, timber, cocoa, cotton, palm oil and minerals were sent to feed European industries at lower prices and yielded very high prices when converted to finished products and brought to Africa. After the partition of the continent among the various European countries trading in Africa, any territory where a European country had spheres of influence legally became a colony for that European country. Africans therefore lost their sovereignty in their own land and had to fight for their independence. African nations began to emerge from colonial rule. First with Ghana, the Gold Coast, which became a British colony in 1901, had to fight for their independence till 6 March 1957, when she became independent. All the causes and effect of the scramble and the partition of the Africa continent stated further proves that Africa would have reached her own higher level of development naturally had the Europeans not intervened in the affairs of the continent. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure to press the bell icon to get notifications when I upload a new video.